we have a winner. The FIDE World Cup is over. I'm going to show you the second classical game between Jan-Krzysztof Duda from Poland and Sergey Karjakin from Russia. So the first of their classical games was drawn. Wasn't very exciting, frankly. This is the second. Solid start from Karjakin, as one would expect from him. He's a very traditional player, I would say. And this line of the Tarrasch has become quite popular recently. It was always thought to be pretty bad for black, and the reason was that e4 was thought to be a very strong move for white. But over the past few years, black has gone in for this endgame, and although it doesn't look very attractive, white can take the two bishops. With engine research, it's been shown that black has good defensive chances here, and that's very typical Karjakin. He's prepared to suffer a bit with black in order to make a draw. I think it's a bit dull, but anyway, that's just another way of playing chess. But Duda, instead of going for that endgame, which is pretty well rehearsed, goes bishop g5. So he's playing in a very classical way, just hitting the isolated queen pawn. And white is active here. It's difficult for black to generate the normal kind of play that you would when you have an isolated queen pawn. You want to generate lots of piece activity, and that's not so easy here, because at the start, basically black has to adopt a defensive formation, just protecting that pawn on d5. And, well, I think it's evident that white is very active here. So queen b6, and well, castles has been seen before. Here, well, Duda has clearly done his homework. He took on f6, and well, when I flicked on the computer, that was the computer move, or the top line of the computer, let's say. It doesn't win material, because after knight takes, this is the game continuation, Karjakin is able to take on b2. So the pawn structure has transformed. So white hasn't bothered trying to put more pressure on that d pawn. He's gone for an exchange of pawns, which at first glance doesn't look like anything special for white. But I suspect that Duda is still in his preparation at this point, and he's researched very well. Now, it's possible just to castle here. An interesting idea from Duda. He puts his king on e2. And as we're going to see, the king can be useful in the middle of the board, protecting that pawn on e3 when the kingside pawns advance. Yes, I know, that sounds unlikely, but watch what happens. I mean, the king is actually very secure on e2, covered along this diagonal. And when white has pieces in play like this, there isn't really any danger at all. And, if you imagine that this is an endgame, then this is really, let's imagine the queens were off the board. You wouldn't castle there. You would put your king on e2. It just feels like a very chunky square. And essentially, they are playing an endgame here, actually. So the rooks come in the middle. Duda is still very, very active. And white's play here is based on attacking the pawn on f7. The opposite colour bishops mean that it's difficult for black to actually fight against this idea. I mean, there's also potentially an idea to take hit and play against an isolated pawn as well. So that's why rook c8 was played by Karjakin. But bishop c4, this is the real aim. He's looking at that pawn on f7, and this is a very sort of familiar idea, of course. And that rook, absolutely beautiful on the 5th rank, controlling key squares. And that's why it's not really possible for black to generate counterplay here. Well, I mean, you can see that, for example, a check here can just be met by rook up, or indeed potentially bringing the rook back as well. White's king is completely safe here on e2. Let me see. Let's try a few moves out. What about knight a5? Well, that can be taken. And then the rook comes in on d7. Notice there are going to be no back rank tricks while the king is on e2. On g1, well, you'd have to take a little care. But obviously, white is still very much in the driving seat here. Hitting f7, hitting b7 looks good for white. So, queen b4. Karjakin just wants to exchange pieces, and he's hoping that he can minimize the damage here. So this is still the plan. Rook d7 to hit this and hit the queenside pawns. So that's why knight b8 was played by Karjakin, to defend the d7 square, preventing the rook coming in. But white still has a huge advantage here. This is so secure. In fact, all white's pieces are well placed. And black has zero chance of counterplay. This is what's so difficult about black's position. There's nothing to distract white. g4 played. Excellent move. So this starts the squeeze of black's king. Black's king is in huge trouble here. Here's an example. g6, g5. And now the knight flips around. Let's say rook here, knight here. Again, it's still looking at f7. And it's even more painful with the pawn on g5. Or rook here. Again, knight c4. Okay, the rook defends along the 7th rank, but now f4. And I mean, this is very nice. And you can see the king sits beautifully on e2. And then f3. Just protecting the pawn. And still huge advantage for white here. You don't always have to hit f7. Now white is switching to a plan of exchanging here and hitting a weak pawn. So basically just white is incredibly active here. h6, h4 doesn't stop white's plan. And in fact, opening the h file can be very, very useful. And here's a good example. If the bishop comes back to g7, knight h4. So because the king is on the same line as the bishop, knight takes is already a really dangerous threat. Okay, let me just show that random move here for black. Okay, knight's, I don't know, a6. Knight takes g6. Discovered check. And then rook h1. That's just for the sake of illustration. So white can use that h file. Okay, let's come back. So bishop e7 played. Rook e5, and this is very neat from Duda. So this is looking really critical. All white's pieces are fantastic. I mean, there's even potential to attack on the h file sometimes. Imagine doubling those rooks. Anyway, the game went like this. Knight c6. Rook d7, giving up the exchange. It's beautiful. So this didn't happen, but if knight takes rook, so the bishop is attacked, g6 is attacked. If bishop takes g5, well, two good moves here. You can take on g6, take back the exchange, rook takes, and black is still tied down to defending that pawn. Such an unpleasant position. Holding this will be difficult. basically white just edges up the board. And it's actually a very powerful attack. Or another way you could go is take here. This way you conquer the 7th rank. This might be actually even better than the other one. And rook a7, and one can still advance these pawns. But this is more difficult, I think, for black, because black is just really passive there. And yeah, controlling the 7th rank is extremely nasty for black. Anyway, I think it's just to show that black certainly doesn't solve all the problems by taking the exchange. Bishop d8 played. Rook b5. Now, let me see. So the b pawn is attacked. If b6, then knight e5 takes. It's just such an unpleasant position for black to defend when he's always tied to defending that pawn. And here we go. We can advance the king side nice and steadily. And that's a nice tactic. So it's king takes and then rook d8 check. So you can see that black is tied down. Let's say here rook e7, followed by the next rook coming in. I mean, if this immediate attack doesn't work, then white can always start advancing these pawns, or possibly with f5 as well. So it's just a horrible position for black to defend. Rook b5 just played. Knight a5. Bishop d5. There are, I think, many ways to win this one. Rook here. I mean, if b6, then knight e5 looks absolutely crushing. And the game finished like this. Rook c7. Bishop takes pawn check. If rook takes, then check. And we take on a5. King g7. Rook takes, bishop takes. Bishop d5. And at that point, Karjakin decided he'd had enough. He's a pawn down and his position is still absolutely miserable. So for example, if b6, knight d4 is highly unpleasant. And if bishop b6, knight e5 continues white's absolute domination of this position. f4. Well, it's a beautiful game by Duda. He kept control totally. He had a good opening. He'd obviously researched it very well. But the way he kept control was really masterful. And particularly to do so against a player such as Sergey Karjakin, who is famed for his defensive ability. So, the winner of the FIDE World Cup 2021 is Jan-Krzysztof Duda from Poland. He's 23 years old. He is now at number 13 on the live rating list. Let me just take you through his opponents. He had a bye in the first round. He was seeded. The seeds were given a bye. He defeated Vasquez from Paraguay in round 2, Sevian, then Idani, so he's a young player from Iran, then Grishuk, Vidit, Carlsen and Karjakin in the final. So that is quite a list of opponents. Young players like Sevian, who's only 20 years old, and more established players like Grishuk, Vidit, Carlsen, and obviously Carlsen and Karjakin at the end. Brilliant stuff, thoroughly deserved. Carlsen defeated Fedoseev in their second game, so he won the third, fourth place playoff. Another crushing game by Carlsen. If I have time, I'll try and show it to you. I won't be able to record it today. Carlsen actually gained rating points from this tournament, by the way. Do join me. By the way, don't forget, like, comment, share and subscribe. Let's try and get to 100k subs. Remember, you get instant notifications if you subscribe. Just click on the bell. Do support the channel. If you've enjoyed my coverage of the World Cup, do consider supporting us via PayPal or Patreon. Check out the extra vids and stuff on patreon.com PowerPlayChess. You'll find the link down there. I'm commentating on live on Chess24 at the moment on the Chessable Masters along with Tanya Sachdev. It's great fun. There's some really entertaining chess being played, rapid play. So do join us on chess24.com for that. And it is the Chessable Masters and my 2 courses for Chessable, How Good Is Your Chess and How Good Is Your Chess 2, are both on sale at discount over the course of the tournament. So do check those out. How good is your chess? I think that's everything. Thanks for watching. Bye now.